All right, let's jump right in. Today we're going to take a look at one of the most famous stories in the entire Bible, the creation story in Genesis. But we're going to look at it through a completely different lens, an interpretation that asks, could one of Christianity's core ideas have been there from page 1, verse 1?
So here's the big question that our source material really wants us to think about. It kind of flips a common idea on its head. Was the Trinity something that Christians figured out way later? Or, just maybe, could it have been there from the very beginning?
You know, the usual thinking is that the whole idea of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, was really spelled out much later, in the New Testament. The Old Testament, well, that's usually seen as the story of God singular. And that's the baseline, the default view that we're about to challenge.
So how do we even start to unpack this? Well, the argument here is a little counterintuitive. To understand the very beginning of the Bible, we actually have to jump way ahead, to the New Testament, to find the key. The source says there are two specific verses that act like a decoder ring for Genesis.
Okay, clue number 1, right here from the Gospel of John. And I mean, this is about as direct as it gets. It says him, and John is talking about the Word, which is understood as Yeshua, or Jesus, was the one who did the creating. The source says this is our non-negotiable starting point. If all things were made through him, then he had to be right there in the middle of the action in Genesis 1.
And if that wasn't clear enough, our second piece of evidence from Colossians really hammers the point home. It's not just that things were made through him, but they were also made for him. This builds a really strong case that his role wasn't just, a side job. It was absolutely central to the whole shebang.
So here's the crucial move. The argument is that these verses aren't just nice little theological ideas. No, they're supposed to be the very framework, the special glasses, if you will, that we need to put on to reread the creation story. They tell us who was actually doing what. Okay, so we've got our clues from the New Testament. With those in our back pocket, let's head all the way back to the beginning and see just how different Genesis looks when we read it this way.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. We've got a side-by-side comparison here. On the left, that's the Genesis you probably remember from Sunday school. But on the right, well, that's the rereading. And you can see the pattern right away. The word God isn't just one thing anymore. It gets specified. Yeshua is pinpointed as the creator, the one actually making everything. The Spirit of God hovering over the waters, well, that's identified as the Holy Spirit, plain and simple. And YHW, the Father, is the one speaking, commanding, and giving the stamp of approval. But maybe the biggest change, the real showstopper, is in Genesis 1:26, that famous line, "Let us make mankind in our image." In this rereading, the us isn't a mystery anymore. It's interpreted as an actual conversation between the three persons of the Trinity.
Okay, so let's just pause for a second and really break down what these changes mean. What are the key shifts that happen when you read the story this way?
So this isn't about randomly swapping out words. It's a really systematic change. The general term God gets split into two distinct persons with different jobs. You've got YHW, the Father, as the authority figure who speaks and blesses. Then you have Yeshua, the Son, as the active one, the Word who gets it all done. The Spirit of God gets a clear name, the Holy Spirit. And it all leads up to this idea that humanity was made in the image of this complex, triune God.
And, well, here we are, right back where we started. We're back to that first question. But now we're looking at it through this very specific lens that the source material has given us. So, what's the big takeaway here? According to this interpretation, it's pretty clear. If you buy that those New Testament verses are the key, then the Trinity isn't some idea that shows up thousands of years later. No, it's actually baked into the DNA of the creation story itself, with each member of the Godhead playing a critical role from the get-go.
And that leaves us with this final thought, a question that the source kind of throws back at you. After walking through this, after seeing the text reframed, does it change how you see those opening lines of Genesis? It's definitely a perspective that invites you to go back and read the beginning from a whole new beginning.